This is JCU Conversations, a podcast show from James Cook University, Singapore. Tune in as we ask experts in the industry more about their lives and their approach to success. Subscribe on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, or wherever you get your podcasts. Let's listen to today's episode.
Hi, I'm Dr. Samuel Chng, Research Assistant Professor and Head of the Urban Psychology Lab in the Lee Kuan Yew Centre for Innovative Cities at the Singapore University of Technology and Design. Joining me today is Associate Professor Denise Dillon, who is Acting Dean of Research and Associate Dean of Research Education at the Singapore campus of James Cook University. We will be talking all things about environmental psychology today, where we explore how our environments shape our cognition and behavior. Welcome, Denise. Let's have a fruitful conversation today.
Great to have you here, Sam, at our campus.
So maybe we can begin by sharing with our listeners, right? What is environmental psychology?
That's a great question, isn't it? So when I first was studying psychology, I had never heard of environmental psychology until I went to do my PhD and realised one of my supervisors was an environmental psychologist. So I thought, what does he do? And I learned that environmental psychology is about studying people in all sorts of environments. And at first I thought nature, but I realised a lot of his stuff was on traffic behaviours as well, which I understand you've done some of. And so environmental psychology is effectively about studying people in different types of environments, the way we interact with them. We change environments and environments change us.
Yeah. This is interesting because many years ago, by the way, I was from JCU, right? Yeah. So many years ago when we study environmental psychology in textbooks, and it was quite theoretical. It was talking about like the socio-ecological model. It was telling us about how environmental psychology started looking at productivity and people working in factories, right? And the effects of lighting and so on and so forth. But we have come a long way in this field. So maybe you can share with us like what are some of the emerging or really trending topics in environmental psychology?
Well, if we bring it round to Singapore, you and I both know, very much so the city and nature phenomenon and the way that people live in cities, and we're having to now. So environmental psychology really started as an offshoot of social psychology, understanding how people interact, but it extended it to not just amongst people, but environments. And so one of the trending things is how do people interact in urban environments, because we're not evolved to respond to urban environments the way we are to nature. And so it's really interesting for me to see in Singapore how that really applies. You talked about it being theoretical when you learned it, and same for me. But I think it's fascinating now that we see the way that people can use environmental psychology to design buildings that people will be comfortable in, that they'll feel safe in. And not just buildings, but our urban environments all around us. The parks and gardens are being designed now to make people feel comfortable, safe, and even to make them, in a way, feel better. So therapeutic gardens are really starting to boom.
Yeah. And also the concept of biophilia. And I mean, Singapore is really one of the leaders in bringing nature into the urban space, right?
Yeah.
And this is increasingly important because majority of the world's population will eventually live in cities.
Exactly.
And with this whole sustainability push or trying to reduce our carbon footprint, it's density or going even denser is actually one way to do it, right? And of course, in Singapore, land constraint, and we are building higher and higher, denser and denser, at the expense of encroaching into green spaces or other natural spaces and resources that we have. Which I think in environmental psychology we know that they have a role to play in our overall well-being.
Yeah. I even think the Singapore narrative, the way that it's developed of being a garden city and then a city in a garden and now a city in nature, kind of reflects the way that environmental psychology in a way has developed, because when, for instance, Ulrich did his landmark study in the hospital, just having patients looking out of a window into nature, he found that could actually reduce the duration of hospital stays, just something as small as that. So being able to just view nature very, in small doses. And then there's lots of the Kaplan's work over many, many years and decades showing that not just looking at nature, but being in nature and interacting in nature and actually taking it into the physical part of it. And now Singapore is applying that through community gardens, for instance. And as I say, having people get out into nature more by making therapeutic gardens and reasons for them to be there, making it all connected.
Yeah. And even in our hospitals, right? You're bringing, maybe because it's a sterile environment, you cannot bring as much plants in. But, rethinking the design of the hospitals so that people have a view of green and rather than just looking at fellow patients, right? And
in some ways that's remarkable. Kutek Pait Hospital is just a phenomenal example of that. I've taken tourists, my family, to visit, to go, you've got to come see this hospital. It's amazing. It's so different from what we think of, because it's just really surrounded by gardens.
And from what I understand is from the clinicians in the hospital, you're trying to keep things out. So you're trying to eliminate all the potential, pathogens and so on. But in that case, they were trying to bring some of it in, but in a very precise manner, right? And
a very planned way, you're right. And I think that's where psychology, environmental psychology intersects with architecture, because from my understanding is they designed the garden before the building was even built. And the way that the building kind of circles the lake to get the fresh air coming in. And this has been known for centuries. Fresh air has always been associated with good health. But people are starting to now apply that more, getting the theory into the application.
and I think many of us do it subconsciously in our own homes, right?
Yes.
We have some plants, whether it's in your home or in the corridor spaces, and we do enjoy time in green spaces, blue spaces, and Botanic Gardens is one of them, right?
Yes.
A UNESCO site where people get to enjoy this space and they do activities there. And I understand that you're also a certified forest guide. So maybe tell us more about that.
Okay, so I learned about forest therapy, about 10 years ago, and started reading about it. So it originated in Japan, and they call it Shinrin-yoku, which is literally forest breathing. And so they've, in Japan, realised that some of the forests there emit, or the trees in the forest emit what they call phytoncides, which is beneficial to humans. And I wondered, a lot of places aren't like Japan. The forests are quite different. We live in the tropics. What would it be like to forest bathe in Singapore? And so I started researching it more and found that you could train as a forest therapy guide. So I did. I went to Australia, and it's, I think, about an 8-week, no, not even 8 weeks, it's 6 months course. We did a whole immersive experience to understand what it was like to guide and how it works. And then we did a 6-month supervised practicum following that. So that was online when I came home. I ended up being one of the 3 pioneer forest therapy guides in Singapore. So there were 3 of us from Singapore, oddly enough, at this same training. And forest therapy takes people into the forest, and we just, in a sense, it's called holding space for people so that they can just spend time in nature without having to fuss about what time is it, what's on my phone, where do I need to be. It's really allowing them to be there and to connect with nature through sensory experiences. So we give invitations to explore nature in different ways. And that really is curated according to the location, the time of day, the people who come sometimes, because very young people can get distracted very easily, but they are more open to play. Some older people can concentrate, but you don't really want them to concentrate in your head. You want them to get out in the sensory experience. And so it's a playful exercise, but a lot of it is really based on allowing people to spend time in nature and sensing it rather than always, we do a lot with our eyes. It's a lot of aesthetics. And we've got many more senses than just our eyes.
absolutely, especially if you're breathing in the phytoncides, right?
Yeah.
You're inhaling them. Yeah. And I think what's unique is you're both a academic researcher as well as a practitioner. So you could see, or you could blend both, the practice as well as starting, the gears in your head, thinking, how do we show it's effective, or what is, the causal mechanism, why is it effective, right? And what about how do we distill some of these benefits, and then maybe if we do not have the opportunity to go into the forest or do not have 1 hour to set aside, how can we distill some of this for our own daily lives?
That's one of the interesting things about forest therapy is you don't technically need a forest. I've got some friends who did the guiding who have done it virtually through COVID, for instance, when we couldn't get out at Jewel in Chng Airport, which is completely not a forest and not natural. But that's what I mean about the urban sites that we find ourselves in now. So a lot of people connect with things that are nature approximate. It doesn't have to be directly nature for people to appreciate those natural components. And I think part of my research has definitely been trying to find what are the mechanisms that are involved in having those connections come about. And in fact, I did one of my first studies on forest therapy. It was, I think, probably the first study in Singapore for this, at Kutek Puat Hospital, and purposely for that because it has a biophilic built design. So for some people who are a little bit anxious about going into forests because there is that effect, to start them in that slow way and starting from a building that's very aesthetically beautiful but has natural components, and then going out into nature. So it's been an interesting learning journey for me as well to understand how people understand nature and what it can be for them.
So this is the researcher looking at how we can understand and derive the benefits for the greater well-being of individuals. Yeah. So maybe we switch tracks or switch topics slightly, because we've been talking environmental psychology in relation to a bit more of our immediate physical environment. But there's also a body of work in environmental psychology that focuses on climate action, climate change, or even perception of the climate crisis, for instance. So maybe we can talk a little about why is it important, or what lens does environmental psychology lend to helping people address climate inaction?
Sam, I've spoken a lot. I would pose that question to you. You've done some great work on this. So what do you guys think from your lab perspective?
Yeah. So that's a curveball. But I think, in psychology, we always focus on the individual, or looking at individual behavior, and behaviors are manifestation of our cognition. Right? Yeah. And our cognition, of course, we are influenced by not only external environments or people around us, but also our internalized beliefs, attitudes. And so I think maybe in the case of climate inaction, people might be, if we put it in more layman's terms, then there could be different disconnects of why they do not do anything. And one of it could be, it's a temporal disconnect. When we're talking about sea level rises, 2100. We may not live to see this. Yes. So there's that temporal disconnect, right?
Yeah.
So the time perspective.
Yeah.
We would also have the spatial disconnect. For instance, in Singapore, tropics. We cannot relate to lesser snow. We cannot relate to earthquakes. We cannot relate to rising sea level that immediately.
Or the polar bears balancing on the ice cubes.
Yeah, exactly. So, but maybe orangutans in the rainforest.
Yeah.
So some of this climate crisis that we see are actually spatially very far from the individual, as well as the last one, which is probably very challenging. It's the scalar disconnect. What can one individual do for 7-8 billion people problem, right? What would switching or changing one behavior do in the scheme of everything, right? So I think when you have any one of this, it's probably going to block someone from taking a good pro-environmental action.
That's interesting you say that, because some of my recent research, we were looking at climate anxiety and why it's starting to be a phenomenon that people are starting to be anxious because it's very uncertain. You're right. These things are far away in the distant. It's like one of those once upon a time stories in a land far, far away, in a time beyond time. You know, it's way over there, and it's I don't know when. And we don't know what it is either. So what is climate change to us in Singapore? People say, well, maybe it's being hotter. So I looked at climate anxiety with my colleagues, and we found that these temporal and spatial phenomena are more cogent to people than age. Like, people used to say, well, if you're older, you won't be as anxious because you've lived through a lot, and it's the young people who are anxious. And we found that's not so. It's more about, do people think that climate change is happening now? And do they think that climate change is happening here?
Yeah.
And so it's very much so that's what makes them anxious. But the other part of it is the flip side, which gives me hope, is that if people are anxious, it can drive some of that pro-environmental behaviour. They will be more conscious about trying to do things that are environmentally friendly, according to our research anyway. It's not published yet.
If you're too anxious, you could be paralysed with fear, right? And
exactly. So it's not good to be, pathologically anxious, but I think we have to stop pathologising anxiety that's reasonable. And I think some level of anxiety is reasonable. If you really are uncertain about things, then sure, it's fine to be anxious. You don't want to be crossing the road because you're not anxious about cars, right? You want to be anxious about them. And it makes sense to be.
And all these are important insights, right? When you craft policies, when you craft programs. So the insights from environmental psychology is it's not just about the built environment, but it's also about the softer side of things. How can we shape people's behavior to get them to care about, or maybe environmental stewardship?
Yeah, you're right. And that's an important part of that intention, I guess, about connecting people with nature. And this is something I believe even Kuan said, if people love something, they'll want to protect it. He wanted people to get into NS, I think, but I'm not sure. But, Richard Love had that same impression in his book, and he said, if you love something, then you'll want to protect it. And the connection to nature is what drives some of that pro-environmental behaviour. Yeah.
And it's very important now because, given the climate crisis that we are seeing, all the projection figures, it doesn't seem like we are chipping off at the challenge that we have ahead of us.
Yeah.
But fundamentally, at the end of the day, at least that's my bias as a psychologist, right? It's that we have power as individuals. And when individuals come together as a collective, right, we would be able to influence demand, influence kind of what is provided, influence what programs are funded and supported. But the challenge is getting the individuals, right, to start thinking, hey, actually, I can make a difference and I can actually influence two other people, and then you have the whole spillover effect,
you're right.
Yeah.
And I think if you think of that back to theory, Bronfenbrenner's whole ecosystems theory, and you're getting away from the individual and out into the system, the political system and the social systems and all of the infrastructure systems that can help that. I think Singapore is a great example of this, that the systems are definitely in place, the policies are in place, the Singapore Green Plan has that intention for connectivity to make people, not make people, to allow people to get out into nature. And so this is where a system can actually implement that and to showcase it to the world that this is how something can work in better ways. Is it perfect? Of course it's not. Nobody's going to say it's perfect. But I think the application of those psychological theories that we've learned about, definitely it's wonderful to see them enacted in life.
Yeah. And I think this is one sub-area of psychology where it's very tangible, right? some fields are slightly harder to observe with your physical eyes or experience with your senses.
Yeah.
But what can be done or what can be explored in environmental psychology has that edge over the other subdisciplines. So maybe my question is, should we have more environmental psychologists or people trained or very well versed in environmental psychology in our world today?
I'm always trying to convince my students that, and when I get them into honours, I try to convince them to do research in environmental psychology. So fortunately, that's worked. But yeah, I think it's been too much of a niche field, and I think we can afford to have it expand and become more prominent. Why not?
Actually, how I see it is, maybe every policy department should have someone with a good understanding of psychology, because people are always at the heart of things.
Exactly.
And if they know environmental psychology, even better.
Yes.
Right, that's a bonus.
Understanding behaviours and what motivates the behaviours.
Yes. Okay. This has been very fascinating. But before I let you off, I have a question for you, which is traditional in this podcast. So if you were able to wind back the clock, back to when you were 21 or when you were thinking about specializing in university, what advice would you give yourself?
Sam, you're sending me back in a very temporal way to 21. Advice I would give myself is probably to go to university earlier. I started quite late, and to believe that interests in environment can translate into something fascinating and worthwhile. And it doesn't have to be just playing around in trees. It can actually be understanding why people would want to play around in trees and how they connect to nature.
And how we can get more people to play around in trees.
Exactly.
This has been fascinating, and if our listeners would like to get in touch with you or to learn more about your work, where should they find you?
They can find me on the JCU Singapore website under my profile, so Denise Dillon.
Thank you. That's all the time we have for today. Fascinating discussion.
It's been fun.